A ride that changed everything. The night was bitterly cold, the kind that crept into your bones no matter how many layers you wore. Ethan Carter gripped the steering wheel of his old pickup, exhaustion weighing on him like a second skin. Single, father, struggling mechanic, a man just trying to make it through another day. Then he saw her, a woman standing alone on the side of the road, wrapped in a coat that wasn't nearly thick enough for the freezing wind. She wasn't your usual hitchhiker. There was something off about her, the way she hesitated before lifting her hand, the way her gaze flickered down the empty road behind her as if she were running from something or someone. Ethan almost kept driving, almost ignored the silent plea in her eyes, but he didn't, and that one decision, it changed everything. Because Madeline Sinclair wasn't just another stranger on the road, she was a billionaire on the run, and Ethan had just become the only person standing between her and the powerful men sent to drag her back, like stories full of thrills, heart, and second chances. If you love stories about unexpected connections, high-stakes danger, and the kind of love that sneaks up on you when you least expect it, then you're in the right place. Subscribe now to dive into a world where fate can turn a simple act of kindness into something extraordinary. You won't want to miss what happens next. A struggling single dad. Offered a ride to a hitchhiker, she was actually a runaway billionaire. The old pickup truck rattled as Ethan Carter tightened, his grip on the steering wheel, his calloused fingers stiff from a long day's work. The heater barely functioned, exhaling lukewarm air into the frigid night. Snowflakes swirled outside the windshield, illuminated by his headlights as he navigated the winding country road. The silence inside the truck was broken only by the rhythmic thump of the wipers battling against the frost. His 6-year-old daughter, Olivia, had fallen asleep in the back seat, curled beneath a tattered blanket. Her tiny hands clutched a stuffed rabbit, one ear nearly torn off, a relic of better times. Ethan glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his heart aching at the sight. She deserved so much more. Money was always tight. The garage where he worked had cut back his hours, and with rent due in less than a week, the numbers in his bank account didn't add up. The thought gnawed at him, an ever-present weight pressing against his chest. But no matter how exhausted or beaten down he felt, Olivia was the one thing that kept him going. She was his world. Just as he exhaled a weary sigh, a figure appeared on the side of the road. A woman, barely visible through the thick snowfall. She stood near an old mile marker, her posture stiff, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Ethan's first instinct was to drive past. Picking up strangers in the middle of the night was never a good idea. But something about the way she stood, her stillness, the way she shifted from foot to foot, made his hands hesitate on the wheel. She wasn't just waiting, she was desperate. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath, slowing the truck. As he pulled to a stop beside her, she hesitated before stepping closer, her face briefly illuminated by the headlights. She wasn't dressed for this kind of weather. A wool coat, yes, but too thin for the icy air. Snow had settled on her shoulders, her dark hair damp from the moisture. Ethan rolled down the window. "Need a ride?" She studied him, wary. Her green eyes flickered to Olivia sleeping in the back seat. A small exhale left her lips, almost like she had been holding her breath. "Yes, please." Ethan reached across to unlock the door. She hesitated for half a second before climbing in, her movements slow, cautious. As she pulled the door shut, the truck filled with the subtle scent of vanilla and something floral, expensive, yet understated. "You're lucky I came by," Ethan said, shifting the truck back into gear. "Not many folks drive this road at night." "I know," she murmured, rubbing her gloved hands together. Ethan glanced at her from the corner of his eye. She was different. Not the type of person he usually saw hitchhiking. She didn't have the ragged, worn-out look of someone used to the road. Her coat, though dusted with snow, looked expensive. Not in a flashy way, but in the way wealth whispered instead of shouted. "You got a name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Maddie." It was a lie. He could tell by the way her gaze flickered away, the barely perceptible pause before she answered. But Ethan wasn't one to pry. Everyone had their reasons for keeping secrets. "Where you headed, Maddie?" "Anywhere but here." He huffed a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "Vague answer. You running from something?" Her fingers clenched together in her lap. "Something like that." Ethan didn't push. He had seen that look before. The guarded wariness, the silent battle between trust and survival. "You warm enough?" he asked instead. She nodded, though her shivering betrayed her. He reached behind the seat and pulled out an old flannel blanket, handing it to her. She hesitated again, then accepted it, wrapping it around herself like a shield. "Thank you," she said softly. They drove in silence for a while, the road stretching dark and empty ahead of them. Ethan focused on the sound of Olivia's quiet breathing, a small comfort in the otherwise uncertain night. After a few miles, Maddie shifted slightly. "The little girl. She's your daughter." "Yeah," Ethan said, his voice softer when he spoke of her. "Olivia. She's beautiful." He glanced at Maddie again. For the first time, there was something softer in her expression, a quiet sadness he couldn't quite place. "She looks peaceful," she added. "She is, for now." His lips pressed into a tight line. "She doesn't know how hard things are, and I want to keep it that way." Maddie nodded, as if she understood more than she let on. Then, out of nowhere, a loud bang echoed through the night. The truck lurched to the side. Ethan's instincts kicked in as he gripped the wheel tightly, fighting to keep the vehicle from swerving off the road. The tires skidded against the icy pavement before he managed to slow to a stop. "Damn it," he muttered, throwing the truck into park. Maddie sat frozen, her fingers gripping the flannel blanket. "What was that?" "Blown tire," he said, already unbuckling his seatbelt. "Stay here." He grabbed a flashlight and stepped out into the cold. Snow crunched under his boots as he walked around to inspect the damage. The front left tire had completely shredded, rubber peeling from the rim. He exhaled sharply. This was the last thing he needed. Maddie cracked the door open. "Do you need help?" "You know how to change a tire?" A small smirk tugged at her lips. "No, but I can hold the flashlight." Ethan let out a low chuckle despite himself. "Fair enough." She stepped out cautiously, pulling the flannel tighter around her shoulders. Ethan worked quickly, though his fingers were numb from the cold. "You do this often?" Maddie asked, watching him with interest. "Often enough." He shot her a look. "And you? You ever hitchhiked before?" A flicker of amusement passed through her eyes. "No." "Figured." Maddie's gaze softened as she watched him work, the way his hands moved with practiced efficiency. There was something about his quiet determination, the way he carried himself, despite the weariness in his features, that made her chest tighten. For a fleeting moment, she wondered what it would be like to live a life like his. One built not on luxury, but on love and perseverance. But she didn't deserve that kind of life, not yet, not when she was still running. The spare tire wasn't in great shape, but it would have to do. Ethan secured the last lug nut, exhaling a cloud of mist into the freezing night air. His fingers ached from the cold, but at least they could keep moving. He had a daughter to get home to, and he had already spent too much time on this roadside detour. Maddie stood nearby, still wrapped in his old flannel blanket. She had held the flashlight the entire time without complaint, though he doubted she was used to standing in the cold like this. There was something about her. She wasn't fragile exactly, but there was a certain unfamiliarity in the way she held herself, like someone experiencing a world they didn't quite belong to. As he wiped his hands on his jeans, she spoke. "You do that pretty fast." "Well," Ethan grunted, closing the toolbox. I do it enough times. I better be fast. She gave him a small, almost shy smile, but before he could respond, a small voice piped up from inside the truck. "Daddy." Ethan immediately turned, his heart softening as Olivia rubbed her sleepy eyes, peering at them through the frost-coated window. "Hey, baby girl," he called back, forcing warmth into his voice. "Go back to sleep, okay? Just fixing a little problem." Olivia's brow furrowed as she squinted at Maddie. "Who's that?" Maddie hesitated, her posture stiffening. Ethan glanced at her, then back at his daughter. "Just someone who needed a ride," he said simply. Satisfied, Olivia yawned and slumped back down against her stuffed rabbit. Within seconds, she was asleep again. Ethan turned back to Maddie, who was watching Olivia with an unreadable expression. "You're lucky," she murmured. Ethan arched a brow. "For what?" She hesitated before answering. "For having her." Something flickered behind her green eyes. Regret, maybe even pain, but she looked away before he could say anything. Ethan wasn't sure why, but something about her words sat heavily in his chest. He shook it off and motioned toward the truck. "Come on, let's get moving." Back on the road, the truck rumbled forward, the fresh tire holding steady. Maddie sat with her hands in her lap, staring out the window at the snow-covered trees rushing past. She was quiet, but her mind was far from still. Ethan finally broke the silence. "So, where exactly am I dropping you off?" Maddie exhaled, the condensation from her breath fogging up the glass. "Somewhere I can get a bus." "A bus to where?" "Anywhere but back there." Ethan gave her a sideways glance. "You keep saying that like it means something." She said nothing. Ethan drummed his fingers against the steering wheel. "You in trouble?" Maddie turned to him, her gaze sharp. "Would it matter if I was?" He didn't answer immediately. He wasn't stupid. He knew when someone was running. He had seen that look before, in people trying to escape something they couldn't face. "It would matter," he finally said, "if it puts my kid in danger." Maddie studied him for a long moment. Then a flicker of something like guilt passed over her features. "I'm not dangerous, Ethan." Something about the way she said his name made his jaw tighten. She had never asked, but she knew. He wasn't sure why that bothered him. "How do you know my name?" She hesitated, then gestured toward his dashboard. "It's on your work badge." Ethan glanced down, and sure enough, his faded mechanic's ID card was clipped near the radio. Carter's. Auto repair, Ethan Carter. He felt oddly relieved. He had almost forgotten it was there. "I'm observant," she added. Ethan huffed. "No kidding." The road stretched long and empty ahead of them, the world beyond their headlights swallowed by darkness. The rhythmic hum of the engine filled the space between them. After a while, Maddie spoke again. "Olivia's mom. Is she around?" Ethan tightened his grip on the wheel. He didn't like talking about it. But something about Maddie's tone wasn't intrusive. It was just curious. "No," he said finally. "She left a long time ago." Maddie frowned. "She left both of you?" "Yeah." Maddie didn't respond right away. Instead, she stared out the window again, as if she were piecing together a puzzle in her head. "I don't get it," she murmured. "How do you walk away from your own child?" Ethan's jaw clenched. "I stopped trying to figure that out a long time ago." Silence fell between them again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. Then Maddie surprised him. "My father left me," she admitted, almost too softly to hear. Ethan glanced at her. "When you were little?" "No," she said with a sad smile. "Just a few days ago." Ethan furrowed his brow. That wasn't the kind of answer he was expecting. "You're running from your family, aren't you?" he asked. She didn't deny it. He sighed, shaking his head. "Maddie, whatever's going on." A flash of headlights in the mirror caught his attention. Ethan frowned. A black SUV was trailing them. It had been too far back for him to notice before, but now it was keeping pace. Too steady, too intentional. He checked the mirror again, his stomach knotted. "They've been following us for a while," he said under his breath. Maddie stiffened beside him. Her entire demeanor shifted, the slight panic in her eyes, the way she sat up straighter. "You know them, don't you?" She didn't answer. Ethan's grip on the wheel tightened. "Maddie!" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Drive faster." His pulse quickened. He didn't know who the hell she was running from. But in that moment, it didn't matter. He pressed his foot on the gas. Ethan's foot pressed harder against the gas pedal, and the old truck roared in protest. The speedometer edged past 60, then 70, but the black SUV behind them didn't falter. It matched their pace effortlessly, its headlights glowing. Ominously in the rear-view mirror, Maddie's hands gripped the edges of the seat so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She kept glancing over her shoulder, her breath uneven. She knew who they were. Ethan didn't like that. He didn't like any of this. "Mind telling me who the hell is tailing us?" he asked, his voice edged with frustration. Maddie hesitated. "I don't—" "Maddie," she swallowed hard. "They work for my father." Ethan gritted his teeth. Great, just great. He had picked up a runaway heiress, and now her father's people were hunting her down. "You should pull over," she said suddenly, her voice urgent. "Yeah, that's not happening. Ethan, please," she pleaded. "You don't understand. These people, they don't like to be told no." Ethan let out a humorless chuckle. "Yeah? Well, neither do I." The SUV crept closer. Too close. Maddie gasped as the vehicle suddenly swerved left, then back right, testing them. It was a warning. Ethan's jaw clenched. He had been in his fair share of bar fights, unpaid bills, and tough situations, but being chased down on a frozen road in the middle of the night wasn't on his list of usual problems. He scanned the highway ahead. No traffic, no exits, just miles of dark road and endless forest. His only advantage, he knew these roads. Without warning, he yanked the wheel hard to the right. The truck swerved onto a narrow side road, kicking up snow and gravel as he gunned it forward. The SUV hesitated, just for a second. But that second was all Ethan needed. "We're gonna lose them," he muttered, focusing on the road ahead. Maddie exhaled sharply, gripping the dashboard. "Are you always this stubborn?" "Only when my kid's sleeping in the back seat," Ethan shot back. She looked over her shoulder at Olivia, still curled up under her blanket. The little girl hadn't stirred. She had no idea that her father was pulling a high-speed getaway in the dead of night. The SUV reappeared in the distance, its headlights bouncing as it sped after them. "Damn it," Ethan cursed. He took another sharp turn, heading toward a more secluded, unpaved road that led into the woods. The truck skidded over the frozen dirt, but Ethan controlled it barely. The SUV hesitated again. The driver wasn't sure if they should follow onto the unstable terrain. Maddie held her breath. "Did we—" Then the SUV's headlights vanished. Ethan let out a slow exhale, but his grip remained tight on the wheel. He kept driving for another mile before finally pulling over near a clearing surrounded by towering pine trees. The silence was suffocating. Ethan killed the engine. The truck sat in darkness, hidden beneath the thick canopy of trees. For the first time since they had been chased, Maddie's shoulders slumped in exhaustion. "That was close," she whispered. Ethan turned to her, his expression unreadable. "No. More games, Maddie. Start talking." She hesitated, still catching her breath. "Now," he demanded. Her hands trembled slightly as she ran them through her damp hair. "I wasn't lying before. My father, he's powerful, controlling. He wants me to live the life he planned for me." "Which is?" "A marriage I didn't agree to. A business I don't want to run. A future I can't stand." Her voice was bitter. "So I left, and apparently he's not okay with that." Ethan leaned back, crossing his arms. "Let me guess. Your dad sent his goons to drag you back home." She exhaled shakily. "Yeah, pretty much." Ethan let out a long sigh. "You're telling me that I just outran a bunch of corporate goons because you don't want to be a rich girl anymore." Maddie flinched. "It's not about the money." "Then what is it about?" She looked away, out into the dark forest. The weight of her answer pressed against her like an invisible force. "It's about control, about freedom. I want to live my own life, Ethan." She turned back to him, her expression raw. "Have you ever wanted something so badly, but the whole world keeps telling you no?" Ethan's stomach tightened. Yeah, he had. He had wanted a stable job, a future for Olivia, a life where he wasn't always fighting to survive. Yeah, he knew that feeling all too well, but instead of saying that, he muttered, "Doesn't explain why you were hitchhiking in the middle of nowhere." Maddie huffed out a tired laugh. "It wasn't part of the plan. I was supposed to disappear before they even noticed I was gone. But I guess I underestimated how much my father loves to win." Ethan rubbed his hands over his face, exhaustion settling in. He had enough problems without getting involved in this mess. "So what now?" he asked, voice rough. Maddie bit her lip. "I don't know." "That's not reassuring." She gave him a weak smile. "It's the truth." Ethan ran a hand through his hair. He should have never stopped the truck. He should have kept driving, but he had. And now here they were, hiding in the woods, tangled in something much bigger than himself. A quiet rustling in the trees made him stiffen. Maddie noticed his reaction. "What is it?" Ethan held up a hand for silence, his ears straining. The wind, a deer, or another rustle. Closer this time. His stomach knotted. They weren't alone. Maddie's breath hitched as she realized it too. Ethan moved fast, one arm around her, one hand reaching for the tire iron under his seat. "We need to go," he whispered. Maddie barely nodded before he started the truck again, headlights off, moving slowly through the trees. If they were lucky, whoever was out there wouldn't notice them slipping away. But Ethan had never been lucky, and as he turned onto a narrow path leading back to the main road, his headlights caught a second SUV blocking the way. Maddie's grip on his arm tightened. Ethan cursed under his breath. The men in the SUV were waiting for them. The headlights of the second SUV cut through the darkness, casting long shadows against the snow-covered trees. The vehicle was parked directly across the narrow dirt path, blocking any chance of escape. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Trapped. Beside him, Maddie's breath hitched. "Ethan!" "I see it." His voice was low, measured, but inside, his heart was pounding. The first SUV, the one that had been tailing them, emerged from the woods behind them, its headlights blaring to life like the eyes of a predator. Ethan exhaled sharply. This wasn't a coincidence. Whoever these men were, they had planned this. Maddie shifted in her seat, her pulse visibly racing. I didn't think they'd go this far." Ethan shot her a hard look. "Then you don't know your father as well as you think." She flinched, but he didn't have time for apologies. Not when they were trapped between two SUVs in the middle of nowhere. His instincts kicked in. He had spent his entire life surviving. This wasn't any different. He scanned the terrain, thick forest on either side, snow-covered ground, a narrow opening between the trees to the right. Too small for the truck, but maybe big enough for them to run. "Maddie," he said quietly, "you trust me?" Her eyes snapped to his. Fear, hesitation, and then determination. "Yes," she whispered. Ethan's grip on the wheel tightened. "Good, because when I say go, you grab Olivia and run." Her lips parted in shock. "What? Ethan, no, I'm not leaving you." "You don't have a choice," he said firmly. "They're here. For you, not me. I'll hold them off. You take Olivia and get the hell out of here." Maddie shook her head violently. "No, that's insane. I'm not running while you—" Headlights flashed. The doors of the first SUV opened. Two men stepped out, their heavy boots crunching against the snow. Ethan recognized the type immediately, not just hired muscle, but professionals. These weren't rent-a-cops. They were hunters. Maddie's fingers dug into his sleeve. "Ethan." "Shh." He watched as one of the men approached, his movement slow, deliberate. The other stayed by the SUV, his hand resting casually near his hip. "Gun." Maybe. Ethan forced himself to stay calm. They couldn't risk a fight, not with Olivia in the truck. The first man reached the driver's side door and tapped lightly on the window. A fake, almost polite smile stretched across his face. Ethan didn't roll down the window. The man didn't seem surprised. He leaned in slightly. "Mr. Carter, is it?" Ethan's blood ran cold. They knew his name. He didn't react, didn't give them the satisfaction. The man sighed. "Look, I know this seems bad, but I promise you this isn't personal." His voice was smooth, practiced, like someone who had talked their way out of situations before. Ethan said nothing. The man's eyes flicked past him, landing on Maddie. "Madeline," he said, his tone changing, "you've caused quite a stir, you know that?" Maddie stiffened. She was trembling, but not with fear, with fury. Ethan could feel it radiating off her. "Tell my father I'm not coming back," she said, her voice steady but ice-cold. The man sighed again, shaking his head. "You know I can't do that." Ethan's fingers inched toward the gear shift. He had one chance, one. "Listen," the man continued, "this doesn't have to get messy. You step out of the car, we take you home, and no one gets hurt." His gaze flickered toward Ethan. "Especially the Good Samaritan here. No reason for him to get involved in this, right?" Ethan's stomach churned. They were giving him an out. They were giving him a chance to save himself. Maddie's hand tightened on his sleeve. She didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. She was begging him not to give up on her. Ethan met her gaze, and just like that, he made his decision. "Hold on tight," he murmured. Then, before the man outside could react, Ethan slammed the truck into reverse. The tires spun against the icy ground, kicking up a storm of snow and gravel. Maddie let out a startled gasp as the truck lurched backward, straight toward the SUV behind them. The men shouted, scrambling out of the way. The truck smashed into the SUV, the impact jarring but controlled. It didn't do much damage, but it bought them seconds. Ethan shifted gears again, this time into drive. The truck roared forward, swerving left. The men were already moving, their voices barking orders. The second SUV's headlights flashed. The driver was trying to block them again. Ethan's pulse hammered. Not today. He veered hard to the right, straight into the trees. Branches scraped against the truck as they barreled through the narrow opening in the woods. The tires skidded, but Ethan controlled it, pushing forward. Maddie clutched Olivia, shielding the little girl as best as she could. "Ethan, this is insane." "Welcome to my life," he shot back. Behind them, the SUVs struggled to turn. The terrain was working against them. They had the advantage. Ethan didn't slow down until he saw a break in the trees ahead, a frozen creek cutting through the forest. They had to cross it. He clenched his jaw. No choice. The truck hit the ice at full speed. For a second it held. Then, crack! The ice splintered beneath them. Maddie's scream echoed through the night as the truck lurched violently to the side. "Ethan." I fought for control. The front wheels dipped. Water surged over the ice. Then, miraculously, they reached the other side. The truck slammed onto solid ground, fishtailing, before Ethan finally managed to steady it. His chest heaved. His fingers ached from gripping the wheel so tightly. Silence. Maddie was panting beside him, clutching Olivia protectively. The little girl whimpered, but was otherwise unharmed. The SUVs were still on the other side of the creek. One of the men stepped out, staring at them in disbelief. They weren't going to risk crossing the ice. Not after what just happened. Ethan let out a slow exhale. They had done it, for now. Maddie looked at him, eyes wide. She was shaking. "Ethan." He turned to her, still gripping the wheel. "Yeah?" She swallowed hard. "You should have let me go." He exhaled sharply. "Not my style." Silence stretched between them. Then softly, "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan's jaw clenched. This wasn't over. But for the first time, he realized something terrifying. He wasn't just protecting Maddie anymore. He was in this fight with her, and there was no turning back. The truck rumbled forward, its tires grinding against the snow-packed dirt road as Ethan pushed further into the dense woods. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. The chase was over, for now. Behind them, the frozen creek had become an unexpected savior. The SUVs hadn't dared to follow. They had bought themselves time. But time wasn't safety. Beside him, Maddie still held Olivia in her arms, her breathing uneven. Olivia had finally started to stir, letting out a soft whimper before rubbing her sleepy eyes. "Daddy," she mumbled, her voice small. Ethan took a deep breath, forcing calm into his tone. "I'm here, baby girl." Olivia blinked in the dim light of the truck's dashboard, her little brow furrowing. "Why's the car shaking?" Ethan glanced at the side mirrors. The truck's front bumper had taken some damage from crashing over the ice, and the engine was struggling. He had been pushing it too hard, asking it to do more than it was built for. They needed to stop. He let out a slow breath. "It's okay. Liv, just a little bumpy road." Olivia yawned and nestled deeper against Maddie's chest, barely awake enough to process what was happening. Maddie held her gently, running a comforting hand over the little girl's dark curls. Ethan's eyes flicked toward Maddie. She looked shaken. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her pale, tense, and exhausted. She caught him staring. "What? You okay?" A humorless laugh escaped her lips. "No, Ethan, I'm really not." He didn't blame her. "You shouldn't have done that," she added. "You should have let me go." Ethan huffed, keeping his eyes on the road. "Yeah, well, too late for that." Silence settled between them. Maddie studied him, her gaze unreadable. Finally she whispered, "Why?" Ethan clenched his jaw. He didn't have an answer that made sense. Maybe it was because he knew what it felt like to be abandoned. Maybe it was because he saw something in her eyes, something that told him she wasn't just another rich girl trying to escape responsibility. Or maybe it was because he had never been the type to walk away from someone who needed help. Instead of answering, he muttered, "We need to find a place to lay low for a bit." Maddie exhaled, running a hand through her tangled hair. "And where exactly do you suggest we do that? A 5-star hotel?" Ethan smirked, despite the exhaustion weighing on him. "Oh yeah, the Hilton's got a special on fugitives this week." Maddie let out a weak chuckle, shaking her head. "You're unbelievable." Ethan's smirk faded as he spotted a turn-off ahead. A barely visible dirt road wound its way through the trees, leading to an old hunting cabin he knew about. It wasn't much, but it would be safe. He turned onto the path, the truck groaning in protest as it climbed over uneven terrain. The headlights cast long shadows against the towering pines, making the forest feel almost alive. After another mile, the cabin came into view, a small, rustic structure nestled between the trees like a forgotten relic of another time. Ethan pulled up beside it and killed the engine. Silence swallowed them whole. Maddie frowned. "Where are we?" "An old hunting cabin," Ethan said, pushing open his door. "Friend of mine used to own it before he moved. It's been empty for years." Maddie eyed the place warily. "And we're just hoping it's still unlocked." Ethan pulled the visor down and caught the glint of metal, the spare key, still tucked into the fold where his buddy had always left it. He tossed it in the air and caught it. Something like that. Maddie's lips parted in disbelief. "You're either the luckiest man alive or the dumbest." Ethan smirked. "Bit of both." He pushed the door open, stepping inside. The cabin smelled like old wood and dust. It was freezing, but it would do. A small fireplace sat against the far wall, with a stack of chopped wood beside it. Maddie followed, carrying Olivia. The little girl barely stirred as Maddie laid her down on a worn-out couch, pulling a blanket over her tiny frame. Ethan knelt by the fireplace, striking a match. The flames caught quickly, crackling and popping as warmth slowly filled the cabin. Maddie sank onto a nearby chair, exhaling. "I still can't believe you did that." Ethan shot her a look. I told you I'm not the type to leave someone behind. She studied him for a long moment. You should be. He arched a brow. Excuse me? Maddie sighed, leaning back. The world doesn't reward people like you, Ethan, the ones who stick their necks out for others. He let out a dry chuckle. Yeah, I've noticed. Maddie watched the flames flicker, her expression distant. I don't understand you. Ethan shrugged. Not much to understand. I'm just a guy trying to keep my kids safe. Her eyes softened. She's lucky to have you. Something in her voice made Ethan glance at her. There it was again, that undercurrent of regret. She looked away quickly, but he had caught it. Maddie, he said carefully, there's more to your story, isn't there? She stiffened, but before she could answer, a branch snapped outside. Ethan was on his feet in an instant, his body going rigid. Maddie sucked in a sharp breath. Did you hear that? Ethan motioned for silence, straining to listen. Another crack. Footsteps. He grabbed the tire iron from the truck, holding it tight. Maddie's eyes were wide. You think it's them? Ethan didn't answer, because he didn't know. The only thing he knew, whoever was out there wasn't just passing through, and they weren't alone. Ethan gripped the tire iron, his breath steady, despite the adrenaline pulsing through his veins. Someone was out there. Maddie remained frozen in place, her eyes locked on him, silently asking the question neither of them wanted to say out loud. Had her father's men found them? The fire crackled softly behind them, casting flickering shadows against the cabin walls. The only other sound was the slow crunch of footsteps outside. Ethan moved swiftly, pressing a finger to his lips before motioning for Maddie to stay put. She clutched the blanket around Olivia tighter, nodding in silent understanding. He crept toward the door, keeping to the edges of the room where the floor wouldn't creak. Peering through the grimy window, he scanned the darkness. The night was still, but the footprints in the snow outside told a different story. Someone had circled the truck. Recently, a shadow moved near the tree line. Not one, but two figures. Ethan's grip on the tire iron tightened. He could handle a couple of guys if it came down to it. But with Maddie and Olivia inside, a fight wasn't an option. He turned back toward Maddie. Stay here. Keep Olivia quiet. Maddie swallowed, her face pale, but she nodded. Ethan inhaled sharply and reached for the hunting rifle mounted above the fireplace. He wasn't sure if it was still loaded, but he'd rather bluff with an empty gun than fight with a tire iron. Slowly, he unbolted the door, pushing it open just enough to slip outside. The cold hit him like a slap, but he ignored it, stepping onto the snow-packed ground. The footprints were fresh, leading toward the back of the cabin. He followed them, moving carefully, his senses sharp. Then, a snap. A sudden movement. Ethan spun, raising the rifle. Wait! Don't shoot! The voice was hoarse, desperate, and completely unexpected. Ethan squinted through the dim moonlight. A man, older, unshaven, bundled in a threadbare coat, stood with his hands raised in surrender. Beside him, a younger woman, maybe in her early 20s, clutched his arm, her eyes wide with fear. They weren't hired muscle. They were scared. Ethan didn't lower the rifle, but he relaxed his stance. Who the hell are you? The older man swallowed hard. Name's Frank, he rasped. We saw your truck. We didn't know if this place was still abandoned. Ethan studied them. Their clothes were worn, not the kind of gear you'd expect from professional men chasing a billionaire's daughter. They weren't here for Maddie. They were just two people trying to survive. The younger woman clutched at Frank's coat. Please, she whispered. We don't want trouble. We need somewhere warm for the night. Ethan exhaled, lowering the rifle slightly. Damn it. These weren't enemies. They were people like him. Struggling. He hesitated, glancing back, toward the cabin. He could feel Maddie's gaze on him from inside, waiting. Finally he sighed. Come inside before you freeze to death. Frank's shoulders sagged in relief. The girl nodded, her lips trembling. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan didn't answer. He wasn't sure if this was a mistake or not. Maddie tensed when she saw the two strangers enter. She instinctively moved in front of Olivia, her body a protective barrier. Ethan caught the way her shoulders squared, the way her hand subtly hovered near the fireplace poker. She was ready to fight if she had to. Frank and the girl hesitated near the door, their expressions uncertain. "This is Maddie," Ethan said, nodding toward her. "And my daughter, Olivia." Frank gave a slow nod. "I appreciate this. We really didn't mean to spook you." Maddie didn't relax. "What were you doing out there?" Frank let out a humorless chuckle. "Trying not to die in the cold." The young woman spoke up, her voice softer. "My name's Lily. Frank and we've been living on the road for a while. No family, no place to go." She shifted uncomfortably. "We saw the firelight. We just wanted to see if we could rest for a little while." Ethan studied them both. He could see the exhaustion in their faces, the hunger in their eyes. He had been there before. Maddie, however, wasn't convinced. She folded her arms. "How do we know you're telling the truth?" Frank sighed, pulling back his sleeve. His arm was thin, lined with scars, old needle marks. "Because I got nothing left to lie about," he muttered. Maddie's lips pressed into a thin line. Ethan exhaled. "We'll give you a warm place for the night, but you leave at first light. Understood?" Frank nodded immediately. "Understood." Maddie shot Ethan a sharp glance, but said nothing. He knew what she was thinking. They were already running from danger. What if these two brought even more of it? But Ethan couldn't turn them away. Not when he saw pieces of himself in them. Hours passed. The fire burned low, casting a dim glow across the cabin. Olivia slept soundly, curled up in her blanket. Frank and Lily sat across from Ethan and Maddie, warming their hands near the flames. Lily studied Maddie, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "You don't look like you belong here." Maddie stiffened. "What's that supposed to mean?" Lily shrugged. "Your coat, your boots, even the way you sit, it's different. You're not used to places like this." Maddie glanced at Ethan, irritation flashing in her eyes. Ethan just smirked. Lily was observant. Maddie sighed, rubbing her temples. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." Frank chuckled. "Try us. We've seen a lot." Maddie hesitated, then muttered, "I'm the daughter of one of the richest men in the country, and I'm running from my own life." Frank let out a low whistle. "Well, damn." Lily blinked. "Wait, you're serious?" Maddie just nodded. For the first time, Lily looked impressed. "That's badass." Maddie let out a surprised laugh. Not the word I'd use. Ethan watched the exchange, something warm flickering in his chest. Maddie was changing, slowly. The walls she had built were starting to crack. Frank leaned back, exhaling. "Well, Miss Billionaire, I hope you've got a plan. Because people like your father, they don't let go easy." Maddie's expression darkened. "I know." Lily spoke up. "What about you?" She looked at Ethan. "Why are you out here?" Ethan shrugged. "I gave a stranger a ride." Frank chuckled. "You're one hell of a taxi driver, then." Ethan smirked, but his mind was elsewhere. Frank was right about one thing. Maddie's father wasn't going to stop looking for her, and Ethan wasn't sure how. Much longer they could stay ahead of him. The clock was ticking, and sooner or later time was going to run out. The fire had burned down to embers by the time Ethan finally allowed himself to relax, just slightly. Frank and Lily had dozed off near the fireplace, huddled under an old wool blanket Ethan had found in the cabin. Olivia slept soundly on the couch, curled up in the innocence of childhood, unaware of the weight pressing on the adults around her. But Ethan wasn't asleep, and neither was Maddie. She sat beside him, staring at the flickering glow of the embers, her arms wrapped around herself, despite the lingering warmth in the cabin. Ethan tilted his head slightly. You should get some rest. Maddie exhaled, shaking her head. I can't. Too wired? Too much on my mind, she admitted. Her fingers traced absent-mindedly over the fabric of her coat. Ethan studied her for a moment. She looked different from the woman he had picked up on the side of the road. There was still an edge of sophistication in the way she carried herself. But the walls around her had started to crack. You think they're still looking? She asked quietly. Ethan leaned back, rubbing a hand over his jaw. I'd bet my last dollar on it. Maddie let out a humorless chuckle. That doesn't sound reassuring. It wasn't meant to be. She sighed, shifting her posture. I knew my father wouldn't just let me go, but I didn't think he'd go this far. Ethan arched a brow. You didn't? Maddie hesitated. Okay, maybe I did, but I guess I was hoping he'd take the hint. Ethan shook his head. Men like him don't take hints, Maddie. They take control. She swallowed hard. He wasn't wrong. She had spent her entire life under the suffocating grip of her father's influence. Every decision, every expectation, every moment carefully calculated. She had been his prized possession, not his daughter, and now she was the embarrassment, the mistake, the runaway. Her gaze drifted toward Olivia, her expression softening. She's really lucky, you know. Ethan frowned slightly. Olivia? Maddie nodded. She has you. Ethan's chest tightened. He had never thought of it that way. He had always been so focused on keeping her fed, keeping the lights on, keeping them moving forward, that he hadn't stopped to think about whether he was enough. Maddie turned to him, her voice quieter now. You're a good father, Ethan. Something in her tone made him pause. She wasn't just saying it, she meant it. You sound like you know what a bad one looks like, he murmured. Maddie inhaled sharply, looking away. That told him everything. Ethan didn't push. He'd learned a long time ago that some wounds weren't meant to be reopened by force. Instead, he simply said, For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. Maddie let out a small, almost bitter laugh. Running? Choosing yourself? He corrected. Maddie blinked, startled by the sincerity in his voice. No one had ever said that to her before. She wasn't sure why, but her throat tightened at the thought. Before she could say anything, a sharp knock at the door shattered the quiet. Ethan and Maddie both froze. The knock came again, louder, more insistent. Frank stirred from his sleep, his eyes groggy. Lily sat up, rubbing her arms. Ethan was already moving. He grabbed the rifle from beside the fireplace, motioning for Maddie to get back. Her heart pounded as she reached for Olivia, holding the little girl close. A deep voice came from the other side of the door. Mr. Carter. Ethan went still. His stomach turned to stone. Maddie's blood ran cold. She knew that voice. Her father's. Men had found them. Ethan exhaled slowly, his grip on the rifle tightening. Who's asking? A pause. Then, we're just here to talk. Maddie let out a quiet, shaky breath. She had heard those words before. They never meant what they sounded like. Ethan didn't move. He glanced at Frank, nodding toward Olivia. Frank understood immediately, stepping forward to take the sleeping girl from Maddie's arms. Keeping her safe was the priority. Maddie's heart pounded against her ribs. They had nowhere left to run. Ethan kept his voice calm even. Sorry, fellas. You've got the wrong guy. The man outside chuckled. The sound sent a shiver down Maddie's spine. Come on, Carter. We know you've got her in there. Ethan's muscles tensed. That's so. Yeah, the man continued. And we know you're a smart guy. Smart enough to know this can go two ways. Ethan flicked the safety off the rifle. The soft click echoed through the cabin. You see, that's where we disagree, he said coolly. Maddie's breath caught. Ethan wasn't backing down. The silence that followed was thick with tension. Then the man's voice turned cold. You don't want to make this difficult. Ethan's jaw clenched. I don't make anything easy. Maddie couldn't breathe. Then, just as quickly as they had appeared, the footsteps outside retreated. They weren't leaving. They were waiting. Ethan didn't move until he heard the sound of a car. Door slamming shut, then silence. Frank let out a breath. What now? Ethan lowered the rifle slowly, his heart still hammering. He turned to Maddie. They're not going to stop, he said. It wasn't a question. It was a fact. Maddie swallowed hard. She knew it too. We can't stay here, Ethan continued. And we can't keep running forever. Maddie's eyes burned. Then what do we do? Ethan exhaled, his decision already made. We take the fight to them. Maddie's stomach flipped. What? Ethan's gaze was steady. Your father thinks he controls this game. Time to change the rules. Maddie had never been more terrified, but she had also never felt more alive. And for the first time since she had run away, she wasn't alone anymore. The weight of Ethan's words settled over the cabin like a thick blanket. We take the fight to them. Maddie stared at him, her breath unsteady. He said it so simply, as if it were the only logical conclusion. As if standing up against one of the most powerful men in the country wasn't an impossible fight. Frank let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. Well, hell, that's bold. Ethan didn't look away from Maddie. You in? Maddie's mouth went dry. Her instincts screamed run, hide, survive. That was all she had ever known. But this was different. Ethan wasn't offering her a way to disappear. He was offering her a way to take her life back, and for the first time she realized she wanted to fight. She clenched her fists. Yeah, I'm in. Ethan gave a small nod. Then turned to Frank and Lily. You two don't have to stay for this, Frank scoffed. Kid, I've been running my whole damn life. At some point you gotta stop and swing back, Lily grinned. Besides, I want to see a billionaire get his ass handed to him. Ethan smirked. Glad we're all on the same page. Maddie swallowed hard. So, what's the plan? Ethan exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. They couldn't just charge in without a strategy. First, he said, we need to figure out their next move. Your father isn't stupid. His men backed off, but they didn't leave. They're waiting, watching. Maddie nodded. They want to isolate me, make me feel trapped enough to surrender. That's their mistake, Ethan said, because they think you're alone. Maddie's stomach flipped. She wasn't alone anymore. They spent the next few hours making preparations. Frank and Lily scouted the surrounding area, confirming that the SUVs were still parked about a mile down the road. The men were camped out, waiting. Maddie used Ethan's old flip phone to check the news. The media had started whispering about her disappearance. Her father had kept the situation quiet so far, but it wouldn't be long before it exploded. The clock was ticking. Ethan sat at the table, eyes scanning a hand-drawn map of the area. We need to draw them away from the cabin. Maddie leaned over, his shoulder. And how do we do that? Ethan tapped a spot on the map. There's an old service road about 3 miles from here. If we can get them to follow, we might be able to disable their vehicles. Frank arched a brow. And then what? Shake hands and hope they leave? Ethan smirked. Nah. Then we make sure they get a message to Maddie's father. Maddie frowned. What message? Ethan met her gaze. That you're done running. Maddie's breath caught. Done running. For so long, she had accepted the idea that her father's power was absolute, that no matter where she went, he would always find her. But now, for the first time, she felt something new. Hope. And it terrified her. By the time the sun began to rise, they were ready. Ethan and Maddie piled into the truck, while Frank and Lily took the back trails on foot, ready to cut off any escape routes. Ethan's hands were steady on the wheel as he pulled onto the road. You sure about this? Maddie inhaled deeply. No. Ethan smirked. Good. Means you're human. She let out a small laugh. You have a terrible way of reassuring people. Yeah, I get that a lot. As expected, the second the truck came into view, the black SUVs roared to life. They're following, Maddie whispered. Let 'em, Ethan muttered, pressing harder on the gas. The road curved sharply, leading toward the old service road where Frank had set up a surprise. Maddie's heart pounded as the SUVs gained speed. They weren't trying to be subtle anymore. "They're closing in," she said. Ethan's grip on the wheel tightened. "Hold on." The moment they reached the service road, Ethan veered sharply to the right, sending a wave of snow and gravel flying. The first SUV tried to follow, but Frank had rigged a steel wire across the narrow path. The second the vehicle's front bumper hit the wire, the SUV jerked to a violent stop, the frame crumpling under the impact. Maddie let out a stunned breath. "Holy—" Ethan didn't slow down. "One down." The second SUV, however, was smarter. It skidded sideways, avoiding the trap, and accelerated. Toward them, Maddie's blood ran cold. "Ethan!" "Relax," Ethan muttered. "I got this." Maddie had exactly zero reason to believe him, but she braced herself anyway. Ethan suddenly slammed on the brakes. The SUV tried to react, but it was too late. It swerved, hit a patch of ice, and skidded sideways, right into a tree. Ethan exhaled. "And that's two." Maddie was shaking. "Remind me never to let you drive in normal traffic," Ethan smirked. "Where's the fun in that?" They stepped out of the truck, approaching the wreckage. The driver of the second SUV groaned, disoriented but conscious. Ethan knelt beside him, his expression cold. "You tell Maddie's father something for me." The man glared. "Go to hell." Ethan smiled. "Nah, I like it here just fine." He grabbed the man's radio, pressing the button. Static crackled. Then a deep, familiar voice came through. Maddie's father. "Madeline." His voice was smooth, unbothered. "I assume you're listening." Maddie stiffened, her entire body going rigid. Ethan held the radio toward her. "Go ahead, say something." Maddie swallowed hard. Then she took the radio. She exhaled sharply before speaking. "I'm not coming back, Dad." Silence, then a slow, quiet chuckle. "You sound confident," her father mused. "I assume that's because you think you're safe." Ethan's jaw clenched. Maddie's grip on the radio tightened. "I know I am." Another chuckle. "You always were stubborn." Then his tone shifted, darkened. "You have no idea what you've started, Madeline." Maddie's stomach churned. Her father's men were nothing compared to what he was capable of, but she refused to let the fear control her. She looked at Ethan, at Frank, at Lily, at the people who had stood by her, fought for her. She wasn't alone anymore. She pressed the radio button again. "And you have no idea who you're dealing with." Then she dropped the radio on the ground and stomped on it, crushing it beneath her boot. Ethan grinned. "Hell yeah." Maddie let out a shaky breath. It wasn't over, not even close. But for the first time, she wasn't running. She was fighting back, and she had no intention of losing. The shattered radio lay in the snow, its broken pieces scattered beneath Maddie's boot, the last remnants of her father's reach, at least for now. The wind howled through the trees, swirling flakes of snow around them. The only sound was the heavy breathing of those standing in the clearing. Ethan, Maddie, Frank, and Lily, a group of misfits who had just declared war on one of the most powerful men in the country. For the first time since this began, Maddie felt something new. Power. For so long, she had been a pawn in her father's game, moved wherever he wanted, forced into decisions she never had a say in. But now, she had just made her first move. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was fighting back. Ethan's voice cut through the silence. "We need to move, now!" Frank nodded, shaking off the adrenaline. "They might be down, but they're not out. These guys don't work alone." Maddie exhaled sharply, forcing herself to stay calm. "Where do we go?" Ethan looked at her, then at the wreckage of the SUVs. "Somewhere they won't expect." Maddie frowned. "You got a secret bunker somewhere I don't know about?" Ethan smirked. "Not quite, but I do know a place where your father won't think to look first." Maddie crossed her arms. "And where's that?" Ethan's grin widened. "Straight into the lion's den." Maddie gaped at him. "You want to walk right into my father's territory?" Ethan leaned against the truck, arms crossed. You said it yourself. He's always 3 steps ahead. He expects you to run, to keep hiding. Maddie's pulse quickened. And you're suggesting what? We do the opposite. Ethan nodded. We stop running, we stop hiding. We make him come to us, on our terms. Frank let out a low whistle. That's either genius or suicidal. Lily grinned. I like it, Maddie rubbed. Her temples. This was insane, absolutely insane. But at the same time, it made sense. Her father's entire strategy was based on control, taking away her options, making her feel like she had no way out. But what if she forced his hand instead? She looked at Ethan, his steady gaze holding hers. You really think this will work? Ethan's smirk faded, replaced by something softer, something certain. I think it's the only way you win. Maddie inhaled deeply. She had spent her whole life trying to please a man who would never see her as anything more than a business deal. Maybe it was time to remind him that she wasn't his property. She exhaled sharply. All right, let's do this. They gathered inside the cabin, laying out their strategy. Your father has a network, Ethan said. Security teams, private investigators, people on payroll who will track every move you make. Maddie nodded. Yeah, but he doesn't have an army. He operates in the shadows, always has. Which means, Frank interjected, if we go loud, we force his hand. Maddie's stomach twisted. Go loud? Ethan leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. We take your story. Public. Maddie's breath hitched. What? Think about it, Ethan continued. Your father controls things by keeping them quiet. The moment this story goes public, Billionaire's daughter on the run, he loses that control. Maddie's head spun. You want to throw me to the media? Not throw you, Ethan corrected. Use them. You're not just running anymore, Maddie. You're making a statement. Frank chuckled. This just keeps getting crazier. Lily grinned. I'm loving it. Maddie ran a hand through her hair. This wasn't what she expected when she left. She thought she'd disappear, fade into the background, live life on her own terms. But if she wanted true freedom, she had to burn the bridges behind her. She met Ethan's gaze, something solidifying in her chest. All right, she said. We go loud, Ethan nodded. Then we need to find the right person to leak this to. Frank smirked. I might know a guy. They drove through the winding back roads, keeping off the main highways. The clock was ticking. By the time they reached the outskirts of the city, Maddie felt her nerves creeping back. Ethan noticed. You good? Maddie exhaled. No. But let's do this anyway. Ethan smirked. That's the spirit. Frank directed them to an old bar tucked in an alleyway downtown. Guy I know. Raymond, investigative journalist. He hates your father. Maddie blinked. Perfect. They stepped inside, the scent of old whiskey and cigarette smoke hitting them instantly. At the far end of the bar, a man in his late 40s sat, nursing a drink. His sharp eyes flicked to them as they approached. Frank grinned. Raymond, got a hell of a story for you. Raymond set his glass down. Does it involve pissing off powerful men? Maddie slid into the seat across from him. Oh, it involves a lot more than that. She pulled out her father's business card from her coat pocket, the last remnant of her old life. She set it on the table. This, she said, is the man who's been hunting me. Raymond arched a brow. I'm listening. Maddie took a deep breath, and then she told him everything. The meeting lasted hours. Raymond listened, asked questions, and took notes. By the end of it, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling. Damn, he muttered, you're really doing this. Maddie nodded. I am. Raymond smirked. Your old man is going to lose his mind when this goes public. Maddie met his gaze. Good. Ethan leaned forward. We need this out fast. The longer we wait, the more dangerous it gets. Raymond nodded. I can have something up by tomorrow morning. Once it's out, there's no turning back. Maddie's heart pounded. No turning back. This was it, the final line in the sand. She exhaled, standing. Then let's get started. Raymond grinned. I like you, kid. Maddie smiled, a real smile, for the first time in a long time. Ethan stood beside her, his presence solid, unwavering. And for the first time, she knew. She wasn't going to lose. Her father wanted a game. Then let's play. Maddie barely slept that night. She lay on the stiff motel bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the ticking clock on the nightstand. Each second that passed felt like a countdown to war, to freedom, to the moment everything changed. By the time the first rays of sunlight filtered through the grimy motel blinds, her fate was sealed because today the world would know the truth. Ethan had already been awake when Maddie stepped into the motel room's dimly lit kitchenette. He had never really been asleep. He sat at the small table, flipping through the news on his phone, his jaw tight. Maddie swallowed. Is it out? Ethan glanced up, his eyes dark with something unreadable. He turned the phone toward her. And there it was, a headline that would change everything. Heiress Madeline Sinclair goes into hiding, claims billionaire father controlling her life. Below it, a subheading, exclusive. Sources confirm Sinclair's daughter has fled under mysterious circumstances, alleging coercion, arranged marriage, and threats against her freedom. Maddie's breath hitched. It was real. Raymond hadn't wasted a second. The article was already going viral, plastered across news sites, social media, morning talk shows. Her father's world was burning. She gripped the edge of the table, her heart hammering. Ethan studied her, his voice calm but firm. You okay? Maddie forced herself to breathe. I don't know. She had spent so long hiding, running, looking over her shoulder, and now she was standing in the center of the fire. But it didn't feel like defeat. It felt like liberation. Frank entered the room, holding 2 cups of cheap motel coffee. Well, kid, you've officially pissed off the most powerful man in America. How's it feel? Maddie exhaled sharply. Terrifying. Lily grinned. Awesome. Ethan smirked. Told you we'd change the rules. Maddie let out a small, nervous laugh. They had, but she knew her father, and he wasn't the type to lose quietly. It didn't take long. Barely 2 hours after the story broke, her father struck back. A statement from the Sinclair Corporation hit every major network. Madeline is a deeply troubled young woman who has made reckless decisions. This situation is a personal family matter, and we are doing everything in our power to ensure her safety. Maddie's stomach twisted. They were painting her as unstable. Ethan leaned over the phone, his jaw clenched. Classic damage control. They want to make you look like the villain. Frank let out a sharp laugh. Yeah, well, it's not working. Half the internet is already calling your dad a control freak. Maddie bit her lip. And the other half? Lily sighed. They're split. Some believe you. Some think this is just some billionaire family drama. Maddie swallowed hard. It's not enough. She had exposed the truth, but that wasn't the same. As winning, Ethan studied her. What would be enough? Maddie looked at him, her stomach knotting. There was only one way to end this for good. I have to face him, she whispered. Silence fell over the room. Frank's brows shot up. Whoa, that sounds like a terrible idea. Ethan's expression darkened. You sure? Maddie's hands curled into fists. He's already twisting the story. If I don't confront him directly, he'll control the narrative. He'll keep coming. This won't end, Ethan exhaled slowly, leaning back in his chair. All right, he said finally, then let's make sure you don't go in alone. They arrived at Sinclair Tower just before noon. The towering skyscraper in downtown Chicago was a symbol of everything her father had built. Power, control, fear. And now, Maddie was walking straight into it. Ethan parked the truck in a nearby garage, scanning the area. Security was tight. Her father had anticipated this. Maddie's hands trembled as she adjusted her coat. You sure about this? Ethan asked. Maddie met his gaze. She wasn't sure about anything, but she was done being afraid. She nodded. Yeah, let's end this. Ethan exhaled sharply. All right then, we do this smart. Stay close. No matter what happens, I've got your back. Maddie's chest tightened. She believed him. They stepped out of the truck, walking toward the lion's den together. The moment they entered the building, security moved in. Maddie had expected it, but still, her heart pounded. As armed guards blocked their path. Miss Sinclair, one of them said, his voice clipped. Your father is expecting you. Maddie lifted her chin. Good. Ethan stepped closer to her side, his body tense, ready to fight if he had to. The guards led them through the grand marble lobby, past employees who stared, whispered. Maddie wasn't invisible anymore. They reached the executive suite. The guards opened the doors, and there he was, Richard Sinclair. Her father stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, staring at the Chicago skyline. He didn't turn when they entered. I assume you're here to gloat, he said smoothly. Maddie took a deep breath. I'm here to end this. Richard finally turned. His expression was unreadable. I have to say, I didn't expect you to be so public about your rebellion. His gaze flickered to Ethan. And I certainly didn't expect you to bring company. Ethan didn't flinch. I don't scare easy. A ghost of a smirk crossed Richard's face. Clearly, Maddie took a step forward. You're going to stop hunting me. Richard arched a brow. And why would I do that? Maddie's hands curled into fists. Because the world is watching now. Richard chuckled. You think a few headlines will stop me? He shook his head. You've always been naive, Madeline. Maddie's stomach clenched. I'm not naive. Not anymore. Richard studied her carefully. Then something changed. A flicker of something, recognition, maybe even respect, crossed his face. You really think you can win this? Maddie exhaled. I already have. Silence. Then Richard sighed, rubbing his temples. Fine, he muttered. You want your freedom? You have it. But don't come crawling back when the real world chews you up. Maddie's breath caught. Was it really that simple? Ethan didn't look convinced. He stepped closer. Just like that. Richard's gaze darkened. She's not worth the mess anymore. Maddie's chest tightened. It wasn't a victory, not to him, but to her, it was everything. She turned to Ethan, her heart pounding. It was over. She was free. Maddie stepped out of Sinclair Tower and took her first real breath in years. It was over. The weight of her father's control, the relentless pursuit, the fear. It all ended here. She had faced him, fought back, and walked away. And this time, he had let her go. She expected to feel relief, but all she felt was exhaustion. The cold air bit at her skin as she exhaled slowly, her breath visible in the crisp Chicago morning. Beside her, Ethan was watching, waiting. You good? He asked. Maddie turned to him. This man, the one who had given her a ride when he didn't have to, the one who had fought beside her when he had every reason to walk away, the one who had believed in her when she barely believed in herself. She let out a small laugh, shaking her head. I have no idea. Ethan smirked. Sounds about right. Frank and Lily leaned against the truck, watching from a distance. Does this mean we won? Lily asked, tilting her head. Frank chuckled. Hell, kid. If this ain't a win, I don't know what is. Maddie let the words sink in. We won. Her father had underestimated her. He thought she was still the scared little girl who would come running back, but she wasn't. Not anymore. She turned back to the towering skyscraper behind her, its glass windows reflecting the morning sun. She had lived her whole life in that prison. Now she was free. She exhaled one last time, then turned her back on it for good. Let's go home, she murmured. Ethan frowned slightly. You sure you know where that is? Maddie looked at him, then at Frank, then at Lily, then at the old, beat-up truck that had carried her away from the life she had once thought was her only option. She smiled softly. "Yeah," she said. "I think I do." The drive back was quiet, peaceful. For the first time in days, weeks, months, Maddie didn't feel like she was running. She was choosing. Olivia was still curled up in the back seat, blissfully unaware of the battle that had just been fought. And won. Ethan glanced at Maddie as he drove. "So, what now?" Maddie let out a breathy laugh. "That's a good question." "You gonna disappear? Change your name? Move to some tropical island?" Maddie smirked. Tempting. Ethan gave her a sideways look. "But," she sighed, "but I don't want to disappear. Not anymore." Ethan arched a brow. Big words for someone who was hitchhiking in the middle of nowhere a few days ago. Maddie chuckled. "Yeah, well, turns out disappearing doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like hiding." She met his gaze. "And I'm done hiding." Ethan held her. Stare for a moment, then nodded. "Good." Maddie hesitated. "What about you?" Ethan raised a brow. "What about me?" She bit her lip. "You spent all this time helping me. What do you want, Ethan?" Ethan huffed a small laugh. "Hell if I know." But there was something in his expression, something different. For so long his world had been about survival, about Olivia, about just making it to the next paycheck. Now he had choices, and for the first time he was letting himself consider them. Maddie smiled softly. "Well, maybe we figure it out together." Ethan's smirk was small, but it was real. "Maybe we do." The diner was small, tucked away on the outskirts of town. The kind of place where the coffee was always hot and the waitresses always called you Hon. Maddie had never worked a day in her life, until now. She tied the apron around her waist, staring at herself in the small employee bathroom mirror. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't high society, but it was hers. She stepped out, adjusting the pen in her apron pocket. The bell above the door jingled, and she looked up just in time to see Ethan walking in, Olivia trailing beside him. She smirked. "You stalking me, Carter?" Ethan grinned. "Nah, just hungry." Olivia beamed. "Maddie, guess what? Daddy let me pick where we eat today." Maddie knelt beside her. "And you picked here?" Olivia nodded proudly. Maddie glanced up at Ethan. "You let her pick, huh?" Ethan smirked. "What can I say? She's got good taste." Maddie rolled her eyes, then stood, pulling out her notepad. "All right, cowboy. What'll it be?" Ethan's grin softened. "Surprise me." Maddie shook her head but couldn't stop the smile. "In from spreading." She scribbled something down, then turned to Olivia. "And for you, princess." Olivia giggled. "Pancakes!" Maddie tapped her pen against the notepad. "Coming right up." She turned toward the kitchen, but before she could take a step, Ethan caught her wrist gently. She looked back, eyebrows raised. "Yeah?" Ethan hesitated for half a second, then quietly, "I'm glad you stayed." Maddie's heart did something stupid and soft in her chest. She squeezed his hand. "Me too." Ethan exhaled, nodding. "Good." Maddie grinned. "Now sit down before I charge you extra." Ethan chuckled, finally letting go, and Maddie disappeared into the kitchen, and for the first time in her life. She wasn't running, she wasn't hiding, she was home, and that's the end of a struggling single dad offered a ride to a hitchhiker. She was actually a runaway billionaire. But before you go, I have a question for you. Where are you watching from? Drop your country or city in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story has traveled. Also, what did you think of Ethan and Maddie's journey? Did you enjoy the mix of suspense, romance, and redemption? Let me know your favorite moment. If you love stories full of heart, action, and unexpected twists, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on more incredible stories coming your way. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you'll be the first to know when a new story drops. Thank you so much for watching, supporting, and being part of this amazing community. I can't wait to hear your thoughts. See you in the comments.